Imagine the scene. You just completed your first study session and you feel excited about yourself because now the information is as clear as day. You have grasped the concepts. It was as if you're grasping the concept by the truth, as it were. We've all been there, haven't we? However, 3 days later, you return to test yourself on what you have learned, only to realize that the information now seems to be like a puzzle to you. You are struggling to fit in the pieces. You can only recall fragments of what you have learned. How the tables have turned, isn't it? Now it will as if the information has you pinned to the floor with your back against the ground. Now, why has this happened? Memory decay. And memory decay is not a result of some neurological complication in your central nervous system. No. In fact, memory decay testifies to the veracity of these words that were penned down hundreds of years ago, that while it is true that the early bird catches the worm, it is the second mouse that gets the cheese. Yes. And many of us who have been like that first mouse, trapped in a vicious circle of unproductive study strategies leading to memory decay. However, this video is meant to help us to be more like the second mouse who gets the cheese. In fact, Albert Einstein put it succinctly when he said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So we keep using crude, ineffective study strategies, we'll keep getting memory decay, and our study would not be improved, right? So what is memory decay? And how can we overcome it? How can we work around it? Well, memory decay is the idea that traces of our memory, they will fade over time because we fail to actively engage with it, right? We fail to actively maintain or revisit it. You see, when we come across a new information for the first time, or when you read about a concept for the first time, what happens in the brain is that you're making neurological or synaptic connections. And what this means is that, imagine your brain were like the sands of a beach, right? You know those sands on the beach, how they look. When you read about the new information, you are making neurological footprints on your brain, or in your brain, on those sands, right? You're making footprints. Just imagine yourself making footprints on those sands. And in a scientific language, you're making synaptic connections. The neural representation of this information in your head is called an engram, right? The neural representation of this information in your head is called an engram. This neurological footprint you are making in your head, synaptic connections. If you don't revisit such information, these synaptic connections will not be strengthened. They would lose their hold over time, right? And you will struggle to recall the information because the bridge has been broken. The connection is no longer there. The signal is lost. The memory has faded. So that is what memory decay is all about. So the key now is, how can we strengthen these synaptic connections that our brain makes? Because that is the key to memory decay. How can we reinforce this information? Why do we even have memory decay happening to us in the first place? Well, the man, Hermann Hebingers, he made a research, I think in the 70s, where he brought about what they call the forgetting curve. And what the forgetting curve basically is all about is that when you read, you forget more of what you read at first. In fact, we forget 70% of what we read 3 days later. Imagine, 70%. However, what would help us to tackle this problem is spaced repetition, right? Spaced repetition, repeating or revisiting the information at spaced interval would help us to recall such information, and we'll be able to retrieve it at will when we need it. And when we hear spaced repetition, many of us, we don't like spaced repetition because we feel like we have a photographic memory, as it were, right? The real reason why many of us run away from spaced repetition, and we often gaslight ourselves that we've mastered the concept at first trial, so there is no need to return, is because we are afraid to find out how much we have forgotten. Because the truth is that you will forget, and you forget a lot. However, when you come back to the information a second time, and not just reread the information, but actively engage with the material, test yourself, quiz yourself, you are strengthening these neural pathways in your head, right? 3 days later, again, you come back to the same information to test yourself, to quiz yourself. You are telling this your brain that, oh boy, this information is very important to me. I want us to keep it. Because if you don't return to the information you've learned, your brain will just push it down and down and down and down your head, right? Your brain will bury the information because there's so much things to store in our head. There's so much information. Your brain don't know the one that is relevant and the one that is irrelevant, except from the signals it gets from you. And those signals is repetition. Once you repeat a memory, Once you do spaced repetition again and again, you are telling your brain this information is vital, is significant, I want us to retain it. So that is why if your spaced repetition is effective, when you need information, you'll be able to retrieve it. And we need to be careful. There's a difference between doing spaced repetition and merely rereading notes. Yeah, there's a thin margin or a thin line between spaced repetition and just rereading your notes. Because you might be rereading your notes again and again, and you keep forgetting again and again because you're not doing spaced repetition properly. Spaced repetition is not just rereading your notes. Because when you reread your notes and fail to engage with the material, fail to rehearse the material, fail to quiz or test yourself, close your notes. Try to recall what you have learned from memory without looking at your notes. Yes, you will struggle to recall the information, but it's in that process of struggling to recall the information, you are putting pressure on your brain. You're applying force, you're applying friction on your brain. You're trying to reestablish that synaptic connection. In that process, you're telling your brain, this connection, I don't want to lose it. I want us to hold it. I want us to reinforce it. And when you do, the more you do it, the stronger it becomes. Because if you don't struggle to recall, you just reread your notes without applying pressure, you will not be able to retrieve the information because you are training your brain to merely recognize the information. There's a difference between recognizing and retrieving. When you reread your notes, you are merely recognizing the information, and when the time comes for you to perform, to execute, you'll be able to retrieve. And that is why in the exam hall, you are able to picture where the answer is in your notes or your textbook, even though the color of the marker used to highlight the information. However, you are not able to retrieve such memory. Why? Because you have failed to strengthen that neural pathway and it has faded away. Another thing that can help us to combat memory decay is active recall. Active recall, like I said earlier, closing your note and trying to repeat the information reactivates such neural pathways in our brain, right? Try to teach it to someone else. Teach it to an imaginary audience. Rehearse it, right? Imagine that you are the lecturer teaching someone else. And this will help the information to stay longer in your head. Sleep is another very important way to combat memory decay. Yes, when you sleep, have enough rest. Because what happens is that when we sleep, our brain consolidates our memory. Those synaptic connections that we have made, it becomes strengthened and reinforced when we sleep. And that is why sometimes you might go to bed with a very difficult problem. However, while you are asleep, your subconscious is working on that problem. And when you wake up, you have a better idea on how to tackle the problem. Why? Because memory consolidation has happened during sleep. So if you don't get proper rest, you'll miss out on this form of study, or this form of attacking memory decay. And that is why people who get less sleep, people who survive on 3 hours of sleep, 2 hours of sleep, 4 hours of sleep, they often experience brain fog. They often see things that they are not supposed to see, right? So when you sleep, your glymphatic system is at work. Your brain is recycling itself. Your brain is pushing out irrelevant information or irrelevant materials and keeping valuable informations. So sleep is very important if we are to overcome memory decay. I've talked about sleep, I've talked about spaced repetition. In my book, Becoming an Academic Weapon, How to Study and Not Forget, I wrote about spaced repetition, active recall, the Feynman technique, blotting, Pomodoro technique, and many other smart study strategies that have been proven to work scientifically. I wrote about them at length, and these strategies are what I use and they help me. And I'm sure that they are also going to help you. So it is my goal that this video helps us to bridge the gap, reduce the gap, collapse the gap between our intention and execution. Because many of us, we intend to study smart. Many of us, we intend to develop study strategies that will help us to enjoy, not just study, but enjoy our study, right? But we don't execute, and that is where the change happens. Change happens when we execute these ideas. You can read 1,000 materials on how to study, but if you don't execute, put it into practice, you will not see any change. Rome was not built in a day, but every day Rome built. So every day, try to put in or see how you can apply these strategies into your study routine. At first, you might not get it, right? You might feel discouraged. It won't come, you won't just get it. It's not like flipping a switch, right? Switching on a light bulb. It takes time and repetition, and the more we do it, the more we can do it. The brain is like an abyss. There's no need to fear that if I learn this much, it's going to get to a point when I won't be able to learn anymore because my brain is full. No, there's something called neuroplasticity. Right? Neuroplasticity describes the process whereby the brain adapts to new information. The brain expands with new information. The more you learn, the more you can learn, and that is something beautiful about the brain. I spoke about neuroplasticity in my book, Becoming an Academic Weapon, how to hack or how to make use of these scientific phenomena to improve our study strategies. Because The more you learn, the more you can learn, right? So I urge you to get the book. If you want the book, Becoming an Academic Web on How to Study and Not Forget, you can drop a comment or text me and I will forward the book to you. So I hope this video has been helpful. If you want me to make more videos along similar lines of thoughts, you can drop a comment. Please like, share and subscribe. Till we meet again.